for the killing of Medgar Evers. This other arm of the state, the Sovereign Commission, was secretly assisting the defense trying to get Beckwith acquitted, and nobody knew that. And so the story ran October the 1st, 1989. At the time that my story ran, the odds were more than 1,000,000 to 1 against the case ever being reopened and reprosecuted. But Myrlie Evers, the widow of Medgar Evers, believed, and she prayed, and some amazing things happened. A couple months later, Jackson police are cleaning out a closet, happened to find crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron D. Beckwith lifted from the murder weapon. And a few months after that, Myrlie Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she saved in a safety deposit box. And a few months after that, the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet. So it's all these things that sound impossible and couldn't possibly happen did happen. And this is why I prefer nonfiction. And anyway, so anyway, I went to interview Byron D. Beckwith. He lived in April of 1990. He lived in Signal Mountain, Tennessee, which is just outside of Chattanooga. It's where the Klan used to hang out. King in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech talks about Lookout Mountain.
Right.
That's the mountain right over. I mean, they're both were Klan havens, I mean, up into the 80s, they had Klansmen would stand at, intersections raising money, holding their hats out or jugs out and getting people to give them money. Oh. And so that's where Beckwith lived. So I went and visited him. We spent about 6 hours talking, and absolutely the most racist person I ever spent serious time with. N-word this and N-word that, and it's just awful, And, one of those people that when you get done, you feel like you need to go take a bath, or that kind of thing. So anyway, got done, got done, and, it was dark by this point. He insisted on walking me out to my car, and I'm like, really? That's okay. I think I can find my way. So he walked me out to my car anyway. He gets me out there and says, if you write positive things about white Caucasian Christians, God will bless you. If you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians, God will punish you. If God does not punish you directly, several individuals will do it for him. And so his wife.
My God.
So his wife had made me
Lord.
a sandwich.
God will do it for him.
I think you can guess what I did with the sandwich. So anyway, he fought extradition, back to Mississippi. He got indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers in December of 1990. He fought extradition back. At the time I went and interviewed him, he didn't realize I was the one that wrote the story that got the case reopened. By now, he'd figured it out. And so he saw me across the courtroom, when he wound up back in Mississippi, and goes, you see that boy over there? When he dies, he's going to Africa. And I turned to a friend of mine and went, I've always wanted to go to Africa. And so Byron D. Beckwith was convicted in the same courtroom he was tried in 30 years earlier, almost to the day, February 5th, 1994. And he was convicted. And when the word guilty rang out, you could hear these waves of joy as they cascaded down the hall till they reached a foyer full of people, black and white, just erupted in cheers. And I just felt chills because the impossible had suddenly become possible. And Myrlie Evers and her daughter, Rena, cheered as well. Not too long after Byron D. Beckwith was indicted, the Vernon Damer family invited me to come visit them. This is the widow of Vernon Damer and son by the name of Dennis Damer. And invited me to their home. This is in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's about an hour and a half south of Jackson. So anyway, I met them there in spring of 1991. And I talked to Mrs. Damer, and she told me this story. Her husband was a farmer NAACP leader, entrepreneur, had a sawmill, had a planing mill, had a little grocery store across the street, and believed in the right to vote would begin to change this country. And the Klan didn't like that. And so they attacked him and his family in the middle of the night, January 10th, 1966, set their house on fire, and began firing their guns into the house. Vernon Dahmer woke up, grabbed his shotgun, ran to the front of the house so his family could escape safely out a back window. Unfortunately, the flames of the fire seared his lungs, and he died later that day. A few weeks later, in the mail came his voter registration card. He had fought his whole life for the right of all Americans to be able to vote, but never been able to cast a ballot himself. The guy who ordered the killing was a guy by the name of Sam Bowers, who was the head of the White Knights of the KKK in Mississippi, responsible for at least 10 killings, 11 probably in Mississippi, at least. I don't know, those are minimum numbers. And so Bowers had never been convicted in the case. And so the district attorney, the Dahmer family, went and met with the district attorney. He acted interested, reopened the case, but got cold feet pretty quickly. And, just had a whole raft of excuses why he couldn't do the case. And when those got taken care of, then he had a whole new series of excuses. And so and then another DA came in and he seemed to care even less. So it looked like nothing was going to happen. And I got an offer to go to Ohio State and get my, master's in journalism. And while I was up there for free, they were paying my way. And while I'm up there, I get this call from this guy. He wouldn't give me his name, but wanted to meet with me. So I flew back to Mississippi, met with him. It was him, a buddy of his, two sons of Vernon Dahmer, me. And we met in this little motel room down the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And, it smelled like chlorine because the pool was inside for some bizarre reason. But anyway, and so this guy proceeds. It turns out this guy was a gambling addict. A recovering gambling addict, because he was going to the 12-step program, and one of the 12 steps was to make amends for the bad stuff he'd done in the past. Well, he used to work for Sam Bowers. He was a young kid, essentially, but he worked for Sam Bowers and overheard Bowers get the orders to kill Vernon Dahmer. And so anyway, he came forward, then he met with the district attorney's office. Now, the guy that was like the key witness back in the 1960s was a guy named Billy Roy Pitts. Billy Roy Pitts was involved in the killing of Vernon Dahmer, dropped his gun, got caught, pleaded guilty, and remember, got a life sentence for that, pleaded guilty to federal time, got a 5-year sentence for that. And a bunch of the sentences were kind of jokes. I mean, they served, got pardoned by the governor, got their sentence commuted by the governor, got their released on work release, that kind of deal. And so I was trying to find out, I couldn't find a record of his state time. What I've been told was he went into the federal witness protection program, and that's why I couldn't find it. So I talked to the Federal Bureau of Prisons trying to find out how much federal time he actually did. So I'm talking to him and said, no, okay, now how much time do you actually do in federal prison? They said 3.5 years. I said, no. After he got done with that, my understanding is he went into, the federal witness protection program, and the archivist said, that's impossible. I said, what are you talking about? It says, there was no witness protection program back then. So what this meant was Billy Roy Pitts had never served a single day of his life sentence in Mississippi. So, kind of a big mistake. And I don't know if the guy was alive, if he was dead, where he was. So I ended up going on the internet. This was the relatively early days of the internet. And so there was a website I knew. You didn't have to have the city or the state. You could just type in the name. And so that's what I did. And up it popped. And Billy Roy Pitts had his address, Denham Springs, Louisiana, his telephone number. So I called him. First 20 minutes of the conversation went like this. How'd you find me? How'd you find me? I'm like, it's on the internet. Internet, I can list a telephone number. I'm like, well, I guess you have to take it up with them. So as a result of my story that he never served a single day of his life sentence, Mississippi authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. He didn't like that, so he ran. And while he was on the run, he sent me this audio cassette in the mail, and I got it. I played it, and this is how it began. Jerry, I just thought I'd let you know you've ruined my life. But I promise if I talk to anybody, I talk to you. So here's this tape. And on this tape, he proceeds to tell me all about his involvement killing Vernon Damer, all about his involvement in all this other Klan violence. So shortly after this, he turns himself into authorities. And this now leads to the rest of Sam Bowers and his right-hand guy, whose name is Devers Nix. And when the family brought Devers Nix in, it was like the most pitiful sight you've ever seen. It was like they wheeled him in the wheelchair. You know, those like green oxygen tanks. He had one of those too, and wheeled him up in front of the judge. And he's like, I can't take more than a couple steps without needing oxygen, Judge. Judge is like, well, I normally don't do this, but I'm going to let you out without bond. A dozen days later, this is like a reporter's dream. We catch him on the golf course. So we got photographs of him playing golf. So he got arrested. Yeah, you love me. So fast forward, Sam Bowers goes on trial, and guess who's there to testify on his behalf but Devers Nix. So this is a tricky situation. He's charged with the same crime. So anyway, his lawyer's talking to him before he gets up there. And he had a really good criminal defense lawyer back in the 1960s, but by now this guy's in his 80s. And the other detail, and I don't mean it cruelly, but just to let you know, they actually let him out of the nursing home to come to the courtroom. They like brought him over. And so he's talking to his client. He's like, now Devers, trying to work out a signaling system. Because, you can take your Fifth Amendment right at any time. Like, you're on the witness stand, whatever it is. It's like, now Devers, when you get up there, you need to take the fifth. I'm going to raise my hand. And Devers is like, yeah. So Devers gets up, he starts testifying. I looked over his lawyer about 5 minutes later, and he's like this. Fast asleep. So much for the signaling, So Devers keeps right on testifying. Yeah, I was in the Klan. Well, the Klan was a benevolent organization passing out fruit baskets to the needy at Christmas. And the prosecutor, under cross-examination, got up and said, Mr. Nix, just how many fruit baskets did you pass out? And Devers says, oh, sad to say, none. I swear it was the funniest trial I ever covered in my life as a reporter. Deadly serious matter, but funny trial. Bowers was represented by a guy by the name of Billy Roy Pitts. Travis Buckley. Travis Buckley he's questioned, but Pitts was on the stand. But Buckley was not just a lawyer for the Klan, he was a leader in the Klan. He was actually indicted for the Damer firebombing, okay, at one point. So he's questioned, the prosecutor is questioning Billy Roy Pitts. There's this planning meeting took place prior to the attack on Vernon Damer and his family. And he's asking about who all was there. He's like, well, I was there. Sam Bowers was there. Devers Nix was there. Travis Buckley was there. And I'm looking over the defense lawyer, no reaction. And then the court reporter goes, could you repeat those names? Because she didn't get them all. And so he's like, well, that's Billy Roy Pitts, Sam Bowers, Devers Nix, Travis Buckley. And now he hears his name, shoots up off the table, the chair, and is like, objection, Your Honor. Yeah, I've covered a lot of trials in my life. It's the only trial I ever covered where a witness implicated the defense lawyer himself. And as we mentioned, and so Sam Bowers was convicted in that case, August 21st, 1998, and given a life sentence just like Beckwith. The next case I worked on, to be honest, was kind of by accident. And Dale knows this. Anyway, I was just looking at the other cases, like the Birmingham case. I came over and interviewed Doug Jones at his office, at the U.S. Attorney's office, and did a piece on him on how he had skipped classes at law school to watch the arguments in 1977 when Bill Baxley, put Dynamite Bob Chambliss on trial. And Baxley is an amazing guy. And so anyway, Doug had skipped law school classes to go, and And he told me that story, and I did a story on him, and I'd done a story just prior to that about the grand jury looking at the case. And in fact, interesting, well, Bob Cherry's, one of the last living suspects, his ex-wife read the story. The AP picked up my story, and it ran nationally, and that's how she knew about that they were reinvestigating the case. The FBI was reinvestigating. Drove more than 200 miles across Montana to the nearest FBI office, to basically tell the FBI, hey, I used to be married to him. I overheard him say he lit the bomb. He lit the fuse. Yeah. So, that happened on the FBI side. On my end, I started talking to Bobby Cherry himself. I didn't know that at that moment. I knew a little bit later. Well, actually, I did. Yeah, I did know that at that point because I had interviewed her at that point. But anyway, I'd been talking to him by phone before then. And so his wife invited me to come visit him. And he lived near Tyler, Texas, which is not far from where I grew up, which is the schizophrenic town of Texarkana. So anyway, I knew where it was. So I took him and his wife out for barbecue because, well, I guess that's what you take Klansmen out for. I'm not really sure. But anyway, we had barbecue and we talked. He's like, I didn't have anything to do with that church bombing. I left that sign shop at 9:45 because I had to get home and watch wrestling. And he even pulled out a sworn statement from this woman. Yes, I remember that night. Well, we're all sitting around watching wrestling. So I got back to the Clarion Ledger where I was working the whole time I was working on these cases. And talked to our librarian, because I remember from when I was a kid, they used to run the TV schedule in the little boxes, in the newspaper. I remember seeing, I grew up reading the newspaper. I mean, I was like reading the newspaper by the time I was 7, I think. Anyway, I remembered that and talked to the librarian. So I said, well, just check with the Birmingham News and see what was on TV that night. And I got an email or message from Susan the next day, there was no wrestling. So it turned out it wasn't any wrestling on for him to be watching, nor had there been for years. So it was obviously a concocted alibi that he came up with years later. And so anyway, he got arrested in that case. I had heard that he had something to do with the beating of Fred Shuttlesworth. I assume y'all all know Fred Shuttlesworth and his story and all that, and I don't have to repeat about him. But anyway, he was over. He was beaten pretty severely in 1957 when he tried to enroll his 2 daughters at the all-white school in Birmingham. Showed up and this big mob just, horribly beat him. His wife was stabbed. I think his daughter had her ankle broken. I mean, it was brutal. And so anyway, I was aware of that, but when I talked to Cherry, he wouldn't admit it. And so I one of the perks of my job was getting these free books about the civil rights movement. They would mail me these free books about the civil rights movement. So I one day get a big thick biography of Fred Shuttlesworth. And I don't know if you're like me, but the first thing I did when I got it is, started looking at the pictures. So I'm flipping through, I'm looking at the pictures, and there's a picture of the beating of Fred Shuttlesworth. And so I already had heard Bobby Cherry had something to do with it. And I'm looking, and it's a real distant shot. There's no way you could make out anybody in the photograph. So I contacted the author and I said, hey, is there, any other photographs of this? He goes, there's footage of it. I'm like, you're kidding. There's footage. And so he pointed me to this old CBS documentary. It's called Who Speaks for Birmingham? If you ever get a hold of it, it's actually excellent. CBS put it together. That's back when they actually would let people talk for 5 minutes before cutting them off. It's really kind of fascinating to watch how television and broadcast has evolved. And so, but Fred Shuttlesworth is on there, and they show the video of him, the whole sequence of him being beaten by the mob. And so here was my problem. I had no idea. I knew what Bobby Cherry looked like now. I had no idea what he looked like in 1957. So I reached out to his son. He was kind of semi-estranged from. He was a truck driver. And I said, Tom, would you mind coming by and looking at this? He goes, oh, yeah. So he came, next time he was in town, he came over and I showed him the footage and he's like, yep, there's Dad. So he even pointed out something I didn't see. It's like, yeah, you see him reaching in his right front pocket. That's where he kept his brass knuckles. And sure enough, you can see him pull his brass knuckles out and waylay Fred Shuttlesworth. And so when Bobby Cherry went on trial, they showed that footage of him beating Fred Shuttlesworth. And they introduced the television logs to show there was no wrestling. And he was convicted and given 4 life sentences, one for each one of those little girls. The next case I worked on is one that, I've worked the most on. It's sometimes called the Mississippi Burning case. The 3 young men, civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andy Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, who were killed by the Klan in Mississippi, Neshoba County in the summer of 1964. So as I mentioned before, if someone tells me I can't have something, I want it a million times worse. So Sam Bowers, who never, ever, ever gave an interview to the press, like hated the press, called us, demonic and everything else, gave an interview to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, but it was sealed. And so I ended up developing sources who, now I guess I can say it's in my book, somebody from the Attorney General's office ended up with a copy, and then he basically let me come over and read it. And Bowers talked about the Mississippi Burning case in 1967. He was convicted of that, federal conspiracy charges in that case. One of 7, the rest of the 18 walked away. And Bowers said in the interview he was quite delighted to be convicted and have the main instigator of the entire affair walk out of the courtroom a free man. He was referring to Edgar Ray Killen, or as he's known locally, Preacher Killen. So I called Preacher Killen up. And, we talked for quite a while. And finally he said, there's some guy in Jackson just keeps stirring things up and stirring things up and stirring things up. And I didn't have the heart to tell him it was me. So I took him and his wife out for catfish. I like feeding them Klansmen, apparently. So, he wanted me to come to his house at like 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, and he lived down this remote road, I'm like, no. And, less than a mile from where the 3 civil rights workers were killed. How about that? So I was like, that's okay. So I got him to meet me for dinner, and him and his wife, and I treated him, and we talked. And he's like, I asked him if he had anything to do with the killings of 3 civil rights workers. He said no. I said, what do you think should happen to people that were responsible? He said, I'm not going to say they were wrong. And then he proceeds to tell me this story about himself. I mean, he just volunteered this. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis in 1968, at that moment in time, no one knew who did it, obviously. And, the FBI agents went everywhere, went and kind of talked to, for lack of a better term, the usual suspects. And so they went to interview Preacher Killen about his whereabouts on April 4th, 1968. He refused to talk to him. But time, went by. The agent left his card and he wouldn't say anything. Agent left his card. And so time goes on. Preacher Killen picks up the card, calls the agent, wants to know who killed King. And the agent's like, why do you want to know? Killen says, man, I want to shake his hand. Sometimes people see this, these old guys going to trial or getting arrested, and they say to me, Jerry, why don't you leave these old guys alone? You know what I tell them? These were young killers. They just happened to get old. Edgar Ray Killen was convicted on the exact anniversary of those killings in 2005, 41st anniversary, and given 60 years in prison, where he died 2 years ago. to date now, there have been 24 convictions in these cases. And it's a matter of faith with me, but I feel like God's hand's been involved in these cases. And but the most amazing thing I've witnessed has actually been some of the racial reconciliation. Not too long after Sam Bowers was convicted, Mrs. Damer, the widow of Vernon Damer, was at the back of the courtroom. He ran into her and the family. And Billy Roy Pitts apologized to Mrs. Damer and asked her to forgive him for killing her husband. And she forgave him. And she began to cry. He began to cry. And isn't that really what redemption's all about? Trying to make things right, even when they've gone so terribly wrong in the past. So thanks for listening. If you got any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and it continues. So
before we start the first question, let me just mention that it is 9 o'clock now, but I hope you all don't mind our extended.
I apologize. It's my fault.
No. It's we just enjoy your presence. We just wanted to more. You all don't mind, right? Ann and the rest of the group.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start the first question. I think I saw. Was that you, Adrian?
Yes. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Very well, thanks. While I was reading your book, two things happened that, caused me pause. One was that Ida B. Wells Barnett was awarded posthumously Pulitzer Prize for her investigation of lynchings back in the Jim Crow era. That's right. If you look at some of her articles, her journey paralleled yours in the way that she suffered death threats and she had to have armed guards and so forth. So I kind of felt that there was a parallel between her work and yours.
Wow.
Then and below, Ahmaud Arbery was shot in Georgia, and the police and the prosecutors did everything they can, to sweep under the rug. And I was thinking, well, what has changed? What is your feeling about that?
Well, to be mentioned in the same breath with Ida B. Wells, who's one of my, journalism heroes. I'm not worthy of that inclusion, but she's incredible. I mean, in so many areas and so many levels, But yeah, you're right. She was. I love her. She was something. Really a crusading journalist who then, of course, later helped start the NAACP. So she's an amazing woman and in so many levels. Why aren't there statues of her? I think Chicago finally is building one of her. No, Holly Springs. I don't believe Holly Springs has one, or Memphis, but they should.
Could you tell us a little bit more about her?
Yeah. She's from Holly Springs, Mississippi. And one of my favorite stories of her, she was, if I'm getting the story right, I think I'm getting the details right, but she was on a rail car and refused to give up her seat. And unlike Rosa Parks, I believe she sank her teeth into the guy's arm or something like that. I may be confusing with one of the other ones, but
it was.
Yeah, and so she sued the railroad and won. She won she won her appeal, not appeal, but won her case in court. And then on appeal, they struck it down. So, and now today, I know that Nicole Hannah-Jones, and I know Nicole and love Nicole. And so she's kind of, they have, Ida B. Wells scholars now for journalists, of color and that are wanting to be investigative reporters and things like that. And I think it's terrific. And anyway, I'm just a huge fan of hers. When she was traveling and training in Tennessee, and then she was in Memphis when her three friends were lynched. And that really kind of propelled her to begin to write about these lynchings. She had to flee to Chicago to begin to, because her own life was in danger. And and just begin documenting, all these lynchings that were happening, nobody was documenting it. And she considered it her duty to document each one of these that were taking place so that the world would know. She's great. Yeah. And what was the other question? Anyway,
It was just, how do you feel about Ahmaud Arbery? Because it's a similar,
yeah.
it's exactly like the cases.
You know what it reminds me of? And I already wrote a piece, and I was hoping the Atlanta paper would run it because it's in Georgia, and I know some people at the paper there, and I sent it, and I thought they were going to run it by now, but acting like they were going to run it. But I wrote about this. You know what it reminded me of? And I guess because I've read a lot of history, it reminded me of the slave patrols. I know that sounds like a really odd, way back reference,
right.
But you're in terms of the law, all white men had authority over all black men. And if they were walking down the road, you could demand where's your pass, where are you going, where are you from, all those things. You didn't have to be, quote, the law. Any white man had authority over any African American. So that's kind of what it struck me as. It's like these white men felt like they had authority over this kid. And, who wouldn't run if you're being chased? You know what I mean? I mean, there's a big pickup chasing you. It's like, yeah, you'd run. You know what I mean? He has run. Apparently he'd been running, I gather. And then they start chasing after him. It's like, and then somebody has a gun, I mean, are you kidding me? It's just, we're so stupid. And these people that think, well, we should be able to have authority and, carry guns around. That's like right now, I'm venturing into opinion here, but I just think it's ridiculous that people can parade down the road or into our capitals and being carried, these almost fully automatic weapons, loaded fully automatic weapons. What the heck? Where are they showing up for? With masks on. And I'm sure you remember that are my age and even probably a little younger. You remember the history of this. Remember when the Black Panthers showed up at the California Capitol?
Yep.
What happened to them? And you remember they had like an emergency session, to pass all this gun reform, so that law, and who pushed it? The NRA, the NRA, and Ronald Reagan and all the folks, pushed for that legislation so that people couldn't openly carry automatic or semi-automatic weapons. But I find the irony of it pretty interesting. If the shoe was on the other foot, I have a feeling they would. If it was a bunch of African Americans coming into the state capitol with fully automatic or semi-automatic weapons, I shudder to think how the guards and police or whatever, state police or whoever would be there would react, because they certainly historically have not acted well. So anyway.
Thank
So
you.
Jerry,
question.
this is Deborah Walker.
Deborah.
I said hi.
Hi. So a couple of things. One, I am listening to your book on
Yeah, what do you
Audible.
think? What do you think?
So I'm on chapter. I'm loving it, and I so appreciate you, and what you bring to this. So I want to say that first.
Sure, I think.
And I appreciate the question about Ahmaud Arbery and the connection that you made with slave patrols, because I think that's really real. So I just want to say those two things. I'll probably have a specific question in a minute.
No, that's all right.
And I think I'm wanting to say more about the connection historically between what happened in Mississippi burning, and what's happening today. So
yeah,
okay.
it's some frightening stuff right now.
Hey, Jared.
Hey, man.
I'm Cecil Guyton, man. I actually, you brought up both Bill Baxley and Doug Jones. And ironically, I took a picture of the two of them at Chris
Yeah.
McNair's funeral. And I think
At Chris's funeral. Yeah.
I was real close to Chris McNair. I was real close.
Yeah.
I was real close to
That was a very moving service. That was a very, very moving service.
But one of the things I find, I haven't read your book yet because a lot of stuff has been going on, but I'm trying to read it right now. But one of the things I would like to know, what was your take on talking to, because I was following the trial. What was your take on, talking to Bobby Frank Cherry and his son? Because I actually wrote a piece that was published in Dallas Morning News in the editorial section. And
Great.
I remember one of his sons making the statement that his father shouldn't be persecuted for things that happened so long ago. And
yeah, I think that's the same son that identified him in the footage, which is kind of ironic.
that is
Anyway, I mean, visiting with, it was like, I mean, I'll give an example of one of the things Cherry said to me. I'm talking to him about, what all happened. He actually admitted he was in the Klan. He talked about it, said one of his job was protecting George Wallace. He said that's what his job was.
Wow.
And so he's, he's a big guy. And anyway, the other thing that was real interesting, he just used the N-word with rapidity, like whenever he referred to anyone black, it was the N-word, and it just everything N-word, and then of course he justified it. Said, well, that's what we use, da-da-da. And it was like, well, I'll get this right. It says, I ain't ever heard an N-word. Well, except for that N-word that called me an SOB. I've forgotten what he said he did to him. It's in my book. But anyway, it's just like, except for that N-word that did such and such, he called me an SOB. And, it's just like, these guys don't get it. You know what I mean? And it just kind of cracks me up a lot of times. They'll say, I'm not a racist, even after they've just said the N-word or something like that. It just kind of cracks you up. And I think the biggest compliment that I've gotten from people that have read the book is, I've gotten this from a number of, white Southerners and white Americans or whatever. Including someone I talked to who, from the civil rights movement, like someone who was in the movement. And they said, we never realized all of that happened. I didn't realize all of that happened. And which to me was astonishing. It's like, what rock have you been living under? But, I was kind about it, but I found that fascinating, because I think a lot of white Americans think they know this history. And African Americans too. I mean, I post every day on like Facebook and Twitter, history, what happened this day in civil rights history. If you're interested in that, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And so, but the reactions to it are always interesting. There always ends up being a really interesting discussion about that. I just posted about Ida B. Wells the other day, and we're talking about Ida B. Wells and her courage and some courage of others who stood up. I mean, she stood up, and so have a lot of others. So
I think I saw Catherine's hand first. Go ahead.
Thank you. Jerry, I loved your book. Absolutely loved it. I was uplifted at the end of every chapter, except I think it was the first where he got off. And I had to wait till the end for him to be convicted. Anyway, I thought you did a fabulous job.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you, to what extent do you know if the Klan is still operating in Mississippi, Alabama, and anywhere else?
Well, the Klan, interestingly, started off as a very Southern thing, but it became a national organization in the teens and 20s. There were more than 4 million members of the KKK. And you'll find their agenda interesting. Their agenda was, of course, they were against the Catholics, they were against the Jews, they were against the immigrants, and their slogan was "America First." I thought that was really fascinating. Really fascinating. You know, history, that's one I love history. History seems to go in cycles. Seems to circle back. It's not ever a straight line. And so I find all that interesting. It seems to repeat itself a lot.
Was it Louise? Did I see your hand next? I think I did. She's muted. I think she's muted.
Yeah, you can unmute her, or she can, or whatever.
Okay, Carol.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you very much for your book, which was it was very, very interesting, and I thank you for your perseverance on these cases and really courage. I mean, you put yourself in a lot of danger. I mean, I hadn't really appreciated kind of the interplay between investigative reporters and the law and the capriciousness of all of these cases in terms of what gets attention and things that are uncovered and timing and so forth. You really brought that out. I also really can see where, you know, kind of people that Trump is able to resonate with. I mean, it always seems a mystery to me, but wow.
Is it a mystery after reading my book?
No. I mean, that's what your book has really shown me where a lot of that comes from.
It's historical.
Yeah. But my question is, the papers that were sealed, I think you said 1977 for 50 years.
Yeah, they're open now mostly. You can go online, Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, and Google that, and it should be the first hit now.
Oh, okay. I was wondering whether
you can look up files on Elvis Presley, Fannie Lou Hamer. Take your pick.
Okay. I thought there might be some things that would be solved when they're.
Well, there are some things that are sealed, but you know the vast majority is.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is that Jennifer? Jay Fur.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead. I saw your hand.
This is Olivia Barton Ferriter, and I grew up in Birmingham and worked for the Birmingham News for many years. I covered a number of civil rights issues, and also covered George Wallace in his last campaign for governor. So I appreciate everything that has been said here. I'm an expat, as it were. The Birmingham News sent me to Washington in 1983.
How about that?
As their Washington correspondent. The first woman to be considered because none of the other men wanted the job. But anyway, that being said, I guess I got Potomac fever and I have been here ever since. But my Alabama and Birmingham heritage, very important to me. My father was an attorney for the Birmingham News and a number of the other media during the time that Martin Luther King was in jail in Birmingham and was working behind the scenes there to try to figure out a way to get him out and so on. I'm very cognizant of my past. And it's something I hold on to. It's something I've had to apologize for, particularly when I went off to college, where I got accused of all kinds of things because of where I was from and so on. But my concern right now is going forward.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in your thoughts on the future. So we've seen what happened with the young man who was jogging in Georgia, which is shocking. But frankly, there are a lot of other shocking things that are going on, including these armed posses that are showing up at Capitol steps, demanding to get COVID and not wear masks and so on. But I am really concerned because I feel like the most vulnerable people among our population are the ones that are being considered expendable. And
Right.
that would be people of a certain age.
Exactly.
That might include me, and also people of color. And so I'm just interested, I just want to know, what can we do as a group and what can we be thinking about going forward in how to address some of these issues? Because frankly, the issues of 1963, they've not gone away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we still are living those issues right now.
Yep.
And, you know, many of us who have been the brave soldiers over the years for trying to undo that,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure where we are right now. And so I'm just like your perspective on that. We look at the past, but I want to look at the future.
Absolutely. And I kind of talked a little bit about that in the epilogue, about some of the things that are, you know, what's been happening the past 5 years or so, roughly. To some extent, it's the fracturing of America. I mean, it's a, you know, you've got the kind of the politics of fear that are being stoked. And of course, that causes us to split along these fault lines. And one of them is, you know, one of the major ones in America is race, because of our historical fault line along race. So I think you know, I mean, you can see it with the response to COVID. It's like you know, normally there's a, you know, an outside enemy. This would qualify. You know, remember World War II. I mean, what happened in World War II? You know, the whole nation came together and rallied and did what it needed to do to respond. And that, you know, you had FDR in fact, I did a story not that long ago. I asked historians what president would be best to fight the pandemic. And by the way, FDR was the one that most historians picked. I thought you found it interesting. And so I think that's what I don't see. I think there's just been a real, regardless of who is to blame, a real lack of leadership, or whatever you want to call it, to bring us together, to try to work together. Instead, it's like the strategy is to tear us apart by race, by gender, by whatever pick your means by which people are trying to fracture us. And I think that's what's happening right now. And so what do we, and so therefore everybody fears everybody else. And so how they respond to fear. And therefore that, they gunned down a black kid. I mean, are you kidding me? Who's running down the road? Are you kidding me? And what authority did they have to even do that to start with? But we've passed these laws that say, yeah, if you're a citizen and you got a gun, you have a right to pull somebody over with a gun and make your own citizen's arrest. Are you really want to make a law that says that? That strikes me as unwise. So we've got to begin to really think through. I am a person of faith, or I think in those terms. I think that we've got to figure out a way to love our neighbor, love each other, love the least of these. And I think that too often it's, everybody else can just manage instead of thinking like you're talking about in COVID, instead of thinking of the least of these. It's like, all right, I'm okay. You're everybody for themselves, or whatever the situation is. So we've got to figure out a way to come together and love each other.
Any more questions? It's a really good discussion. Oh, go ahead, Adrian, go ahead. Unless there's someone else who want to give one before Adrian. No?
Oh,
Jerry.
James, can I?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Deborah.
Oh, who was that?
Deborah never had
Oh,
one.
Deborah, you said you had a question burning.
I have a. So I absolutely agree with you. It's about loving one another, and part of the loving one another is to be able to hear one another's truth across race,
Absolutely.
and gender, and not take it personally.
Right.
Rather to understand that we are a part of a culture in which race and gender and other kinds of differences have invited us to be divisive with one another. So I think it's about hearing one another,
I agree.
and not taking it personally, and learning how to do that. And I say that, and again, I want to affirm what I heard you personally taking on when you did this work, and to say thank you for the work that you've done. I really appreciate your perspective and what you've offered to us as a group. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
I'd like to thank you too. Adrian, did you have one last?
Yes, very quickly, Jerry.
Yes.
I'm wondering, you mentioned in your book several times the trepidation that your wife had about the work you were doing. But what about the rest of your family and friends? How did they react?
I mean, the people I was close with, I mean, they were very supportive. I mean, in retrospect, I'm very, very sympathetic with my wife and, at the time, and totally understand where she's coming from. I was, 29, 30, 31, a lot of this was going on, and I was definitely headstrong and obsessed, and, I'm going to go, I understand, she's 8 months pregnant, and I walk in and go, yeah, I'm going to go talk to Medgar Evers' assassin, she's not responding well to that news, I understand that better now. At the time, I wasn't, maybe I just kind of was, well, I got to go do it, so I'm certainly more sympathetic to what she went through. And it was a weird upbringing. I've been talking to my kids lately, with the book out. In fact, they came to my Dallas signing, and Dale was there too. And it was great. It was like a family reunion. A bunch of my family was there, which a bunch of my dad's families in Texas. So,
Wow, that's really good. Let's give Mr. a real good hand here.
Thank y'all.
Thanks a whole lot. You've been so impressive, and we appreciate it. We're looking forward to you too, Celestia, next month, and we'll send we're already starting with the preparation, Judy and I. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ann for the final closing remarks.
Well, I gave everybody an opportunity to unmute yourself if you'd like to. Just, Jerry, thank you so much. I also loved the book and learned so much from it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't generally cry real tears when I'm reading a nonfiction book, but I sure did that time.
Right.
Thank you.
Jerry, thank you so much for doing this for us. It's been a tremendous evening. We've all been enlightened, and we look forward to your next book. But if you haven't go so far, here it is. Check it out. You'll learn more about what he talked about. But we've had a fascinating time with you this evening, and thank you so very much.
Thanks so much, Dale.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank
all
you
of
very
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
Y'all.
Thank
Great.
you so much.
And I'm going to try to get over to Birmingham, once everything gets a little bit, hopefully at some point, back to normal, and we'll have a book signing that way. I'll try to come back to Dallas too, Dale.
Let us know, Jerry.
Let me know.
I will. Thank y'all.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Good to see you guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.